So we're in the small blind and we're dealt ace-king. The player under the gun min bets 20 cents or 2 big blinds, so we'll definitely want to come in for a 3-bet in this spot. We don't have much hands or information on this player, but ace-king's at the top of our range, so we definitely need to be 3-betting here. So he calls, the flop comes 4-jack-5, 2 hearts. Now, the hands that he could possibly be betting here, or calling us with, are hands like king-queen, ace-queen, ace-king, pocket pairs, 7s, 8s, 9s, hands like that. So a lot of those hands will end up folding if we bet, and some of the hands that call us we're actually ahead of, like king-queen and ace-queen. So I think c-betting here is definitely our best option. So we'll go ahead and see what happens. I believe I c-bet. I hope I do. And we do. We bet $1. And he goes ahead and folds the hand. We're dealt ace-jack under the gun. Very standard to open the pot here, especially in a 6-handed game. We have 2 folds, 3 folds. It's to the small blind. A player we have very little information on, and we've only played 1 hand with him so far. And he comes in for a 3-bet. Now, because we've represented so much strength by opening under the gun, and he has still come over the top of us and 3-bet from the small blind with 2 players left behind him, this hand that he's representing has ace-jack crushed, so I think we definitely have to fold in this spot. We're dealt ace-queen under the gun. Obviously we need to open the pot with a hand this strong. It's also important to note that this is a 5-handed game with 1 player sitting out. So we flop our ace. We certainly want to be c-betting this pot. We don't want any club to come out or another jack, for example. So we want to charge any hand like that to draw to another card. So we fire our c-bet, and if he raises us, we will be put to a difficult decision, because it's unlikely that he would be raising with as a total bluff in a spot like this. So he either has something like ace-jack or a flush draw, or maybe even a set. So our hand isn't doing too well against that, but there are a couple of hands that we do have beat, and he could also have the same hand as us. So the 9 of clubs is an interesting card. It gives us the opportunity to learn more about his hand. So by checking and reevaluating in this spot, depending on his bet sizing, we can try to make an educated guess as to the hands he might be holding. So he tanks for a bit, and if he checks back, then pretty sure he doesn't have a flush. So he bets kind of a weird amount, where it looks like if I come over the top and check raise all in, he might still fold, but I don't really want to do that because I'm not holding a club. I don't really have a backup plan if he does call. It's just going to be my hand versus his, and I think there's a good chance that he actually has my hand beat here. So I don't really want to just go all in. I think the best decision in this spot is to call. And when we call, our plan is to make certain moves depending on what the river looks like. So if the river is a queen, we're going to go all in for value. If the river is a king, we're going to go all in as a bluff. If the river is any blank card, like the 2 of spades or the 3 of hearts, we're going to check with the intention of folding to another bet. And finally, if the river is a club, we are definitely going to go all in as a bluff and hope to take down the pot right there. Now the reason why I don't believe he already has a flush is because of his bet sizing. It's telling me he's not terribly committed to this pot, And if he was holding a nice club, he would probably just check back here and try to hit it. So for those reasons, I don't believe he's actually holding a club, and I think the bluff will be profitable. And there it is, the King of Clubs. So the perfect card for us. Well, obviously the Queen would have probably been a little bit better, but the King of Clubs is just as good. We can now even get if he already had a flush, we can get him to fold, but we can get tons of better hands than Ace Queen to fold in this spot. So we definitely like it, and sticking to our plan, we're going to go all in. So he tanks for a bit. I mean, imagine if you had Ace Jack in this spot. You would definitely want to think about it a little bit and probably try to find a couple of reasons to make the call, but ultimately you have to be correct so often to make a profitable call here with two pair. It's worth it to just fold. We have 5-7 suited on the button. I'll tell you in advance, this is not going to be a very big hand, but it's a very profitable play that I have in my playbook, and encourage all of you to use the same one. So we have a tight player who's raised under the gun, so their hand range is a little bit more defined. So when we play in position, regardless of our hand, we can read the situations a lot more accurately. So on a 10-10-9 board, it's unlikely that a hand like Ace Jack has connected with it. So I think we can profitably fire off a bet here and get a lot of hands, a lot better than 5-7 to fold in this spot. And he does in fact fold the hand. We open up the pot here with Queen 10 offsuit and are called by a very loose player on the button. We flop our open-ended straight draw, so we definitely want to be c-betting at this pot. And our opponent is thinking for a little bit and decides to come in for a raise. It's really small. We have the pot odds to draw to our straight, so we go ahead and make the call. The Jack of Spades comes off, which is a really interesting card because it can give us a lot of information about his hand. When he checks back here, we know he doesn't have a jack, and we know that he probably doesn't have a strong king because he would want to protect that against the flush. So if he bets here, we'll definitely want to fold because we're not going to have the correct odds to actually make the call. But also if he bets here, he probably has a strong king and we can't get him off the hand. So we hit our straight. Now it's all a matter of getting value. We've pinpointed his hand to some kind of a weak king. That's his most likely holding at this point. So with that information in mind, we want to bet a certain amount that we can actually get paid and get that value out of a weak king. So we'll probably want to be betting somewhere between $1.30 to $1.75 roughly, and with that we should be able to get paid by a king. Now the flip side of that is if we do raise that amount and he raises us, we can actually maybe even get away from our hand because he would probably only do that with a boat. It would be really difficult. I don't think we actually would in this spot, but had the stacks been a little bit deeper, it would be an opportunity where you could actually fold a straight on a board like this if your opponent re-raises you all in at small stakes, because usually that's only going to be a set or better, which in this case would represent a full house. He makes the call and we take down a nice pot. So we're dealt pocket queens here with a poster behind us, so we raise to 4 times the big blind here to try to get a little bit more people to fold. But we definitely like our hand and want to get some action, and the poster calls us. So when a player has posted, you automatically assume they're not very good, and on top of that they bought in for a really awkward half stack. So with that information, I think that they're probably not so good here. Now she calls our c-bet, and that doesn't necessarily mean a king. It could mean a flush, it could mean a king, but again, because this player is kind of bad, I'm not giving their credit for either one of those, and I think I can get paid by a jack or one heart, so I decide to go all in here, and the player ends up folding, so queens are good. Now here we have pocket twos. We're dealt in the big blind. We have the player under the gun who's raised, so this is definitely a good spot for us to be set mining, because the hand that this player is likely to have is pretty strong. So we have better implied odds to actually get paid if we hit our set. Now, I'm just remembering this hand, and this is actually an example of how not to play a hand. So pre-flop is fine, I think it's okay. We make the call because if he does have two high cards, we're ahead, and then we turn the straight and we don't bet. We let him check back and hit the worst card of all time, the 7 of diamonds, and we end up chopping the pot. Here we have ace queen, and we've 3-bet the pre-flop raisers open. We flop our ace, which is good, but it's a pretty dangerous board with 3 spades. And we decide to check so that we can try to get our money in better on the turn when there's not so many flush possibilities, but then he turns around and fires a really big bet, which is kind of curious. So we're trying to just check back if we don't hit a flush, but when that spade comes off, we have to turn our hand into a bluff, I believe, because now we can get a couple of hands to fold that are better than ours, like ace king or ace 10 or some kind of a small flush, and at the same time we can get hands that are worse than ours to call, like maybe ace jack with no spade if he's really desperate, for example. So I really like betting here primarily as a bluff, and we take down the pot. Now in that same breath, we're dealt aces at another table, and we get to 3-bet, and it's especially a good spot because the small blind was the original raiser, so they've represented strength, gone all in, dream situation, get it in with aces pre-flop against queens, and you're a huge favorite. So we actually run good, hold up, and take down a very nice pot. Here we have 6-5 offsuit. Everyone's folded to us. It's a relatively loose open, but I definitely like to be playing a lot in position, so we open our 6-5 and get one caller by kind of a noob player. So he bets into us, and what I do here is what I like to call a semi-float, which means I actually have a draw, but I'm not really drawing towards it. I'm more floating so that if we get a card like a king, for example, I can represent it and get a hand that had maybe a 7, like an ace 7 or something like that, to fold, and just put a lot of pressure on a pair that's smaller than a king. Here we've got king queen. We've opened pre-flop and got one caller in the big blind, so we definitely want to come in for a c-bet here, and we're min bet. So usually this means flush draw, but at the same time these players are kind of bad, and I don't want to stick all my money in with one pair, so I'd prefer to see a turn card and reevaluate. The king comes off, which is really good for us, but could also be bad if he's holding something like jack 10. The river 9 is also scary, so there's actually not many hands we beat here, so we definitely want to check back and hope our hand is good.